Those scriptures in Samuel that we had gone over, which we just covered a moment ago, and to which I gave some modern types and shadows for us today, can certainly reflect a modern church system, whether such a thing is being conducted by an evil man, a dictator who bends such things to his own will and furtherance of self-gain, and a lot of them do, or whether such a thing is being conducted by a good, godly man, using all such financial and staff resources to actually help the needy and the poor. And there are ministers doing that. Don't kid yourself. But the main problem with our quoted verses is that it looked upon all such things as negative toward the people who either wanted such things for themselves or who had demanded such things for themselves, or even who had simply walked into that situation. As I've said, the modern church is a device created by God himself. So if that's the case, then what's the actual problem here? And if there is a problem, what's the solution? Well, even though I'm saying that there's nothing wrong with attending or participating in the modern church, whether under the bad guys or under the good guys, I must say, however, that God would prefer us to reach beyond the scope of the church system to get even closer to him. Even, get this, if we stay in the church, because it's deeper than just the building. What really stops us from achieving a higher goal in him is obviously the infirmity of our flesh being involved in the whole process of all this. Fleshly minds, not your natural skin. And of how easy it is for us to become religious in Adam's name, fleshly religion, for there is a godly religion too, as I'm going to also show in a moment when I quote James. Also of how easy it is to concentrate on fleshly worship therein instead of worshiping God in spirit and in truth. Therefore, it is us, ourselves, that is the real problem, and not the church which God himself had pitched. But us, either being that dictator ourselves, or by us being holy on Sunday and being a devil on Monday, or that we concentrate on rituals and outward forms of worship formalities rather than on godly love toward our neighbors. Friends, if we change ourselves, then nothing on the outside can truly be wrong. If it's all right in here, what's really wrong out here? It's God's world. He's working it. For we'll begin to see this whole thing called life in all of its varied forms as to being godly ordained and for the end results being good purposes. So what we really need to concentrate on, therefore, instead of destroying all the churches and evil men out in the world, is ourselves, and of us finding true, pure religion. James 1:27, pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this: to visit the fatherless and widows in their afflictions, loving one another with true godly agape love, and to keep himself unspotted from the world, that is, from both the ungodly world and also of man's religion. Can we not see God's own hand doing what he will in this entire world, this entire planet, this entire universe? As I hope to point out during the course of this present book, and even in part 2 of this present series, in Carnal Ordinances Part 2, the naturalistic world that had come to an end. Yep, you guessed it. I'm also reading that book, Part 2, which is The Surprising Dismissal of Water Baptism and the Communion. I wrote this in here because this is Part 1 of that Carnal Ordinances sub-series of my teaching series. Before I even had that book title, I had wrote this because I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to call it yet at that time. So you're going to see elements of what I'm speaking on in that other book starting in here, because this is part 1, again, of that series. That even though church services can be a glorious event when God comes in and blesses a meeting with his Spirit or heals the sick, of other wonderful things that I myself have witnessed on multiple occasions, what's actually necessary for salvation, though, is really more important than all of that. This is reaching beyond the church and the church system that I've mentioned already. But the church is the necessary step to get to the point that I'm talking about now, of actually worshiping God in spirit and in truth, as he talks about in John 4:24. But just what is that of what's more important than an actual church service? Well, that's exactly what I'm hoping to show during this present Carnal Ordinances series. In this book, and especially part 2, again, the surprising dismissal of water baptism and the communion, when I'm going to expose the church's carnal ordinances for what they truly are. Very important subject, which still grip the modern church today, of which I began speaking on in the last chapter in this book, before going headlong into them in part 2, which, again, we're already reading part 2 in other videos. As we should understand, and looking beyond the adolescent level of the church's true purpose, that is in training years for youngsters. Again, it don't have to be young in natural years, but young in godly years, of how to become ministers themselves, or simply of they becoming grown, Christ-minded individuals. It's a goal. It's just because God has ordained for there to be churches, it doesn't mean in the least that all of them are doing God's ultimate pure will. And I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about by that. And that's an understatement. But the bottom line of it all, and of what his perfect will is, and here, once again, I'm looking beyond the scope of just church services, it consists of basking in and of adapting pure godly love toward one another, which is actually more precious to Jesus than of how loudly or goodly we can sing in a church service, or of how religious we can look during praise time, of how holy we can act during the year, of how well we preach, or how smart we might appear, etc., etc., etc. Is it cruel of me to say? Well, this entire thought is actually engulfed within what Paul had said here, in what we call the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, 1-3. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, and I don't have charity, that's pure godly love, I'm become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. But before I continue, let's look at charity from Strong's Greek Dictionary. Love, that is affection or benevolence, specifically plural, a love feast. It's love. Now let's continue in 1 Corinthians 13. Though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but I don't have godly love, I'm nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned as a martyr, and I don't have godly love, it profits me absolutely nothing. That doesn't mean that these things aren't also important, but if they're not mixed with godly love, then they're nothing. Notice these activities in this 1 Corinthians 13 of what folks can do inside or even outside of church services, but without true godly love being involved. Speaking tongues of angels, having the gift of prophecy, understanding all mysteries, having all knowledge, having all faith to remove mountains, bestowing all our goods to feed the poor, and even giving our bodies to be burned as a martyr. What is to be said of all that? That we need to stop having church services? No. Some people come to that conclusion. We need to learn how to employ the only ingredient that'll make any of it to actually count. True godly love for our neighbors. Whereas Paul also said, without true love being involved, I could become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal, or I could actually become absolutely nothing. And it'll end up profiting me absolutely nothing. In fact, godly love, this maturity that I've already spoken on for us to reach, that's our goal. It's so important that it's the only thing that can pass us from death unto life, a true inner resurrection. 1 John 3:14-15, we know that we have passed from death unto life, an inner resurrection, because we love the brethren. He that loves not his brother abides in death. Whoever hates his brother is a murderer, And you know, no murderer has eternal life abiding in him.